Fake service dog, huh? You think you can just waltz in here with some pet wearing a vest and expect special treatment? Get that mutt out of my store before I call animal control. Marcus Wheeler sneered, pointing aggressively at the German shepherd, sitting perfectly at attention beside the weathered veteran. Staff Sergeant James "Bear" Rodriguez felt his chest tighten as he watched his faithful companion Zeus remain motionless despite the verbal assault, trained discipline overriding natural instinct to protect his handler. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Staff Sergeant James Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps, retired, carried invisible, wounds that ran deeper than the visible scars, mapping his left arm and shoulder. At 42, he moved through the world with the careful precision of someone who had learned that sudden movements could trigger memories he'd rather keep buried. His dark eyes held the weight of 3 tours in Afghanistan, where improvised, explosive devices had stolen not just his physical wholeness, but his ability to navigate crowded spaces without his heart racing like a war drum. Zeus, his 4-year-old German shepherd service dog, was more than a companion. He was a lifeline. The magnificent animal had been trained by Operation Canine Heroes, a non-profit organization dedicated to pairing combat veterans with specially trained service dogs. Zeus could detect the early signs of Rodriguez's panic attacks, interrupt nightmares that left him gasping and disoriented, and create physical barriers in crowded spaces that made civilian life manageable again. The dog's calm amber eyes missed nothing, constantly monitoring his handler's stress levels with the same intensity Rodriguez had once reserved for scanning Afghan hillsides for enemy movement. Rodriguez lived in a modest apartment in Riverside, California, surviving on his military disability payments and the occasional odd job his PTSD allowed him to maintain. Today had started like any other: morning medication, breakfast shared, with Zeus, followed by their daily routine of errands that helped Rodriguez practice being around people without feeling like he was back in a combat zone. The grocery store, the bank, the pharmacy, each location a small victory in his ongoing battle to reclaim normalcy. Wheeler's Electronics and Repair had been the final stop on Rodriguez's list. His ancient laptop, his only connection to online. Veteran support groups and job search websites had finally given up completely. The blue screen of death had become permanent, and Rodriguez needed it repaired or replaced. With limited funds, repair seemed like the only viable option. He'd researched the shop online, reading reviews that praised Wheeler's technical skills and reasonable prices. Nothing had prepared him for the confrontation that would unfold. Wheeler's Electronics occupied a corner storefront in a busy shopping plaza, its windows plastered with advertisements for phone repairs, computer services, and gaming accessories. The interior smelled of electronic components and industrial cleaner, with rows of shelves displaying cables, adapters, and various tech gadgets. Behind the main counter, Marcus Wheeler, a heavy-set man in his late 30s with thinning hair and perpetually suspicious eyes, had built a reputation for technical competence, overshadowed by his abrasive personality and deep-seated cynicism about humanity. Rodriguez entered the store quietly, Zeus maintaining perfect heel position beside him. The service dog wore his official vest, clearly marked with patches indicating his status and training credentials. Rodriguez approached the counter, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder, already feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that came with unfamiliar environments and potential confrontation. "Excuse me," Rodriguez said quietly, his voice carrying the controlled tone of someone accustomed to military communication. "I called earlier about a laptop repair. James Rodriguez." Wheeler looked up from the smartphone he'd been disassembling, his gaze immediately fixing on Zeus with obvious irritation. "Yeah, I remember. What I don't remember is you mentioning you'd be bringing a dog into my shop." This is Zeus, my service dog, Rodriguez explained, maintaining his composure despite the edge in Wheeler's voice. He's trained and certified. I have his documentation if you need to see it. Wheeler's expression soured further. Service dog, right? Look, buddy, I've seen this scam before. People slap a vest on their pet and suddenly they think they can take it anywhere. This is an electronics repair shop, not a petting zoo. Health codes, insurance liability. I can't have animals in here contaminating sensitive equipment. Rodriguez felt his pulse quickening, but Zeus immediately moved closer, providing the grounding pressure that helped interrupt the rising panic. Sir, service dogs are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Zeus is specifically trained to assist with my combat-related PTSD. He has the right to accompany me in public accommodations. Combat-related, Wheeler scoffed, his voice dripping with skepticism. Let me guess, you're one of those guys who thinks wearing a uniform makes you special forever. Newsflash, pal, your glory days are over. This is the real world, where people work for a living instead of playing soldier and then expecting handouts. The insult hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. His hands began to tremble slightly, the familiar signs of an impending panic attack beginning to manifest. Zeus immediately positioned himself between Rodriguez and Wheeler, his trained response to his handler's rising distress levels. I'm not looking for special treatment, Rodriguez said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. I just need my laptop repaired. Zeus doesn't interfere with anything. He's trained to remain calm and unobtrusive. Wheeler leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with obvious disdain. Fake service dog, huh? You think you can just waltz in here with some pet wearing a vest and expect special treatment? Look, I've dealt with enough scammers to know the real deal from the fake stuff. Real service dogs cost tens of thousands of dollars. You telling me the government spent that kind of money on you? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The question revealed Wheeler's complete ignorance about veteran services and the sacrifices made by combat veterans. Rodriguez tried to explain that Zeus had been provided through a non-profit organization specifically serving wounded warriors, but Wheeler cut him off with a dismissive wave. Save the sob story for someone who cares. I run a business here, not a charity case support group. You want your laptop fixed? Fine, but that mutt stays outside. I'm not risking my insurance premiums because you want to play dress-up with your pet. Rodriguez felt the walls of the shop beginning to close in, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Zeus immediately began deep pressure therapy, leaning against his handler's legs while maintaining alertness to the threatening situation. The dog's training included protecting his handler from aggressive individuals, but his primary focus remained on preventing Rodriguez's complete psychological breakdown. Please, Rodriguez said, his voice barely above a whisper. I understand your concerns, but Zeus is legitimately trained. I have his certification papers, his training records from Operation K9 Heroes. He's not just a pet. He's medical equipment. Without him, I can't function in public spaces. Wheeler's response demonstrated the cruel indifference that some civilians showed toward veterans struggling with invisible wounds. Medical equipment, that's rich. What's next you're going to? Tell me your emotional support peacock needs to come shopping with you, too. The mocking tone pushed Rodriguez toward a full panic attack. His chest felt like it was being crushed by an invisible weight, his vision beginning to tunnel as traumatic memories threatened to overwhelm his consciousness. Zeus immediately went into crisis intervention mode, pawing at Rodriguez's leg and positioning himself to provide maximum physical support. Get that mutt out of my store before I call animal control, Wheeler continued, his voice rising with aggressive authority. Better yet, maybe I should call the police and report you for trying to scam local businesses with your fake service animal. I bet they'd love to hear about another fraud case. The threat of law enforcement involvement sent Rodriguez spiraling deeper into panic. In his traumatized mind, police meant questions, confrontation, potential arrest, scenarios that his PTSD made feel like life-or-death situations. Zeus whined softly, his trained response to his handler's severe distress, but maintained his position as a living anchor in Rodriguez's storm of psychological chaos. Wheeler interpreted Zeus's vocalization as aggressive behavior. Now it's growling. At me? That's it, you and your fake service dog are out of here right now. Take your broken laptop and your sob story somewhere else. Maybe find a therapist who can explain the difference between reality and whatever fantasy world you're living in. Rodriguez stumbled toward the door, Zeus guiding him with gentle pressure and positioning. As they reached the exit, Wheeler delivered one final insult that would prove to be his downfall. And don't come back unless you're ready to follow the rules like everyone else. The war's over, soldier boy. Time to grow up and stop expecting the world to cater to your problems. Outside Wheeler's electronics, Rodriguez collapsed onto a bench, his breathing ragged and his hands shaking uncontrollably. Zeus immediately began his trained response protocol, providing deep pressure therapy while remaining vigilant for additional threats. The service dog's calm presence gradually helped Rodriguez regain some measure of control, but the humiliation and disrespect burned like acid in his chest. Rodriguez pulled out his phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through his contacts, until he found the number he was looking for. Master Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Iron Vasquez had been his platoon sergeant during his final deployment, a career Marine with 24 years of service and a reputation for protecting her Marines. With fierce maternal intensity, she'd helped Rodriguez navigate the medical retirement process and had insisted he keep her personal number for emergencies. He hesitated for a moment, not wanting to burden his former sergeant with his civilian problems, but the disrespect shown. To Zeus, to his service, to every veteran struggling with invisible wounds, felt like something that transcended personal pride. This wasn't just about him. It was about the sacred bond between service members and the duty to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Rodriguez dialed the number, his heart pounding as it rang twice before connecting. "Rodriguez, you better be calling with good news, or you better be bleeding," came the familiar gravelly voice that had once commanded respect across the entire battalion. "Sergeant Vasquez, it's Bear. I need to report something. It's about disrespect to a service member and his working dog." The line went quiet for several seconds before Vasquez responded, her voice dropping to the dangerous calm that every Marine who'd served under her learned to fear. "Someone disrespected you and Zeus. Give me details, Marine. All of them." Rodriguez found himself pouring out every detail of the encounter to Master Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez, his voice gaining strength as he recounted Wheeler's cruel words and dismissive attitude. Zeus remained pressed against his leg, providing the steady comfort that allowed Rodriguez to maintain his composure while reliving the traumatic experience. He called Zeus a fake service dog, Sergeant, said I was scamming people, that the war was over and I needed to grow up. Threatened to call animal control and the police, made it sound like my PTSD was just me living in a fantasy world. Rodriguez's voice cracked slightly as he continued, but what really got to me was how he disrespected every veteran who's struggling with invisible wounds. Like our service meant nothing, like our sacrifices were just excuses to get special treatment. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. When Vasquez finally spoke, her voice carried the cold precision of a senior non-commissioned officer who had just identified a target that needed immediate attention. "Rodriguez, what's the exact address of this establishment?" "Wheeler's Electronics and Repair, 2847 Magnolia Avenue, Riverside. It's in the Crossroads Shopping Plaza." And this Wheeler character, describe him to me. Physical appearance, approximate age, any distinguishing characteristics. Rodriguez provided the details, wondering why his former sergeant was gathering intelligence like they were planning a military operation. Vasquez listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification on specific points. "Marine, I want you to listen to me very carefully," Vasquez said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had once guided Rodriguez through some of the darkest moments of his military service. "What happened to you today was not just personal disrespect. It was an attack on the fundamental values that every service member has sworn to defend. When someone mocks a veteran service dog, they're mocking the invisible wounds that dog helps heal. They're mocking the sacrifice that earned those wounds. They're mocking the very concept of service before self." Rodriguez felt tears welling in his eyes as Vasquez continued, her words carrying the weight of shared experience and unbreakable bonds forged in combat. "But here's what this Wheeler individual doesn't understand," she continued. "When you attack one Marine, you attack the entire Corps. When you disrespect a veteran service dog, you disrespect every service member who's ever struggled with the aftermath of war. And when you threaten to call law enforcement on a disabled veteran who's simply trying to live his life with dignity, you cross a line that requires immediate correction." "Sergeant, I don't want to cause any trouble," Rodriguez protested weakly. "I just wanted to get my laptop fixed and get out of there." "Trouble?" Vasquez's voice carried a hint of dark amusement. "Marine, trouble is what happens when good people stay silent while predators attack the vulnerable. Trouble is what happens when we let ignorant civilians think they can abuse veterans without consequences. What I'm planning isn't trouble, it's education." Rodriguez could hear the sound of movement in the background, the familiar sounds of military efficiency being applied to a civilian problem. "Sergeant, what are you planning?" "Rodriguez, do you remember Staff Sergeant Chen from Bravo Company? The one who lost his leg to an IED outside Helmand Province?" "Of course, Tommy Chen, hell of a Marine. Heard he got out about the same time I did." "That's right. Tommy's been working as a civilian contractor for the past 2 years, specializing in cybersecurity and digital forensics. Turns out he's been investigating cases of service dog fraud for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Real fraud, not the imaginary kind that Wheeler thinks he's exposing." Rodriguez felt a spark of hope beginning to build in his chest. "Is he local?" "Local enough. Tommy's been based out of Los Angeles, but he's been working a case in Riverside for the past week. Something about a network of businesses that have been filing false insurance claims related to service animal incidents. Interesting coincidence, wouldn't you say?" The pieces began falling into place in Rodriguez's mind. Vasquez wasn't just planning a simple confrontation. She was orchestrating a precision operation that would address Wheeler's behavior through official channels, while potentially uncovering larger patterns of fraud and discrimination. "There's more," Vasquez continued. "Remember Captain Sarah Mitchell from our battalion? The one who went to law school after her deployment. The JAG officer who helped with my medical retirement paperwork. That's the one. Captain Mitchell has been practicing disability rights law for the past 3 years. She's been building a practice specifically focused on ADA violations and service animal discrimination cases. She's won some significant settlements against businesses that violate federal disability laws." Rodriguez began to understand the scope of what Vasquez was organizing. This wasn't just about defending his honor. It was about creating a systematic response to discrimination that would protect other veterans from similar treatment. "Sergeant, how did you know about Tommy and Captain Mitchell being available?" Vasquez's voice carried a note of pride that Rodriguez remembered from their military service. "Rodriguez, do you think I became a master gunnery sergeant by accident? Do you think I spent 24 years in the Corps without building a network? of Marines who look out for each other. When one of my Marines calls me with a problem, I don't just offer sympathy, I offer solutions. Gee, but I don't understand how they can respond so quickly. I mean, it's not like they were just sitting around waiting for something like this to happen. Actually, they were, Vasquez replied with satisfaction. Tommy's been investigating Wheeler's electronics for the past week as part of his current case. Apparently, Wheeler's been filing insurance claims suggesting that service animals have damaged his equipment, then collecting settlements while continuing to discriminate against legitimate service dog handlers. Tommy's been trying to find a veteran willing to document Wheeler's behavior firsthand. Rodriguez felt his breath catch. You mean I walked into the middle of an ongoing investigation? More than that, Marine. You became the key witness in a federal case. Your encounter with Wheeler wasn't random bad luck. It was the missing piece in a puzzle that Tommy and his team have been working for months. The implications began sinking in. Wheeler's behavior wasn't an isolated incident of ignorance and cruelty. It was part of a calculated pattern of discrimination and fraud that had been targeting veterans with service dogs throughout the region. As for Captain Mitchell, Vasquez continued, she's been working pro bono cases for Operation K9 Heroes, the same organization that provided Zeus. She's been looking for a clear-cut case of service dog discrimination that would allow her to establish legal precedent for enhanced penalties under the ADA. Wheeler just handed her exactly what she needed. Rodriguez looked down at Zeus, who had been monitoring the conversation with the patient attention that characterized his breed and training. The German shepherd's amber eyes seemed to reflect an understanding that this moment represented more than just personal vindication. It represented justice for all service animals and their handlers who had faced similar discrimination. What do you need me to do, Sergeant? Right now, stay exactly where you are. Tommy and Captain Mitchell are already en route. Tommy's bringing some interesting federal documentation that Wheeler's going to find very educational. Captain Mitchell is bringing legal paperwork that's going to make Wheeler understand the financial consequences of ADA violations. Rodriguez could hear the sound of vehicles in the background of Vasquez's call, suggesting that multiple people were mobilizing for this response. How many people are involved in this? Enough, Vasquez replied cryptically. Rodriguez, what Wheeler doesn't understand is that when you serve in the military, you become part of something larger than yourself. You become part of a family that doesn't abandon its members when they're struggling. You become part of a brotherhood that responds to threats against any member with overwhelming force. But this isn't combat, Sergeant. This is just some ignorant civilian who doesn't understand service dogs. Marine, let me explain something to you. Vasquez's voice took on the instructional tone she'd used during their deployment briefings. Combat takes many forms. Sometimes it's bullets and bombs. Sometimes it's fighting for your mental health after you come home. Sometimes it's standing up to bullies who think they can abuse veterans because they believe no one will stand up for us. Rodriguez felt Zeus shift position, the dog's training allowing him to sense the change in his handler's emotional state from despair to rising hope and determination. Wheeler made several critical errors today, Vasquez continued. First, he assumed that you were alone and vulnerable. Second, he assumed that service dog discrimination was a victimless crime that no one would investigate. Third, he assumed that veterans don't have resources and support networks that extend far beyond what civilians can imagine. What's going to happen when everyone arrives? Wheeler's going to receive a comprehensive education about federal disability law, veterans' rights, and the consequences of insurance fraud. Tommy's going to present him with evidence of his pattern of discrimination and fraudulent insurance claims. Captain Mitchell is going to explain the legal liability he's facing and offer him options for making things right. Rodriguez felt a mixture of anticipation and concern. Will this really make a difference? I mean, changing one person's attitude? Rodriguez, this isn't about changing Wheeler's attitude. That's probably hopeless. This is about creating consequences for discriminatory behavior that other business owners will understand. This is about establishing legal precedent that will protect the next veteran who walks into a business with a service dog. This is about sending a message that the veteran community protects its own. The sound of approaching vehicles drew Rodriguez's attention to the parking lot. He could see several professional-looking cars arriving, their occupants moving with the purposeful efficiency that characterized military operations, even in civilian contexts. "Sergeant, they're here." "Good. Rodriguez, I want you to remember something important. What happened to you today wasn't your fault. You didn't deserve Wheeler's disrespect. You didn't bring this on yourself by asking for reasonable accommodation. You are a decorated combat veteran who earned the right to be treated with dignity and respect." Rodriguez felt tears streaming down his face as Vasquez's words washed over him like a healing balm. Zeus immediately increased his pressure therapy, responding to his handler's emotional release with the patient support that had helped Rodriguez survive countless difficult moments since his return from combat. "But more importantly," Vasquez continued, "what's about to happen isn't about revenge, it's about justice. It's about ensuring that Wheeler understands the consequences of his actions and making sure he doesn't repeat them with other veterans. It's about protecting the next service dog handler who might need Wheeler's services." Rodriguez watched as Tommy Chen approached, his prosthetic leg moving with practiced efficiency as he carried a briefcase and tablet computer that undoubtedly contained the evidence that would transform this personal encounter into a federal case study. Behind him, Captain Mitchell walked with the confident stride of an attorney who had spent years fighting for veterans' rights in civilian courts. "Marine," Vasquez said, her voice carrying the warmth and pride that had always characterized her. "Relationship with her subordinates, you served your country with honor in combat. Today, you're serving your fellow veterans by standing up to discrimination and ensuring that Wheeler faces consequences for his behavior. That's not just personal courage, that's continued service to something larger than yourself." Rodriguez straightened his shoulders, feeling Zeus adjust his position to provide maximum support as they prepared to face Wheeler again. This time, however, Rodriguez wasn't facing the confrontation alone and vulnerable. This time, he was backed by the full weight of a military community that had spent years learning to protect its own against all threats, foreign and domestic. Tommy Chen reached Rodriguez first, his approach deliberate and professional despite the obvious urgency in his movements. The former staff sergeant had transformed remarkably since their service days together. Where Rodriguez remembered a young Marine struggling with the transition from military to civilian life, he now saw a confident federal investigator whose prosthetic leg hadn't slowed him down for a second. "Bear Rodriguez," Chen said with genuine warmth, extending his hand in the familiar grip that connected all Marines regardless of time or circumstance. "Gunny Vasquez told me what happened. I'm sorry you had to experience that kind of treatment, but I'm grateful you called it in. We've been waiting for exactly this kind of documented incident." Behind Chen, Captain Sarah Mitchell approached with the measured confidence of someone who had spent years translating military justice into civilian legal victories. Her civilian attire couldn't disguise the bearing of an officer who had commanded respect in both military courtrooms and federal district courts. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, offering a crisp handshake. "I remember processing your disability retirement paperwork. I'm honored to represent you in this matter, and I want you to know that what Wheeler did today constitutes multiple federal violations that we're going to address comprehensively." Rodriguez looked between his former comrades, still struggling to process how quickly his isolated humiliation had transformed into a coordinated military-style response operation. Zeus remained at his side, alert but calm, his training allowing him to recognize the shift from threat response to friendly support. "I still don't understand how you both happened to be available so quickly," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. Chen smiled, opening his briefcase to reveal sophisticated electronic equipment and official federal documentation. "Bear, I've been working this case for 6 months. Wheeler's Electronics has been on our radar since March, when 3 different veterans filed complaints about service dog discrimination. Each time, Wheeler would apologize, claim ignorance, and then file fraudulent insurance claims, suggesting the service dogs had caused thousands of dollars in equipment damage." Insurance fraud. Rodriguez felt his anger building again, but this time it was focused and purposeful, rather than the helpless rage he'd experienced earlier. "Systematic insurance fraud," Captain Mitchell confirmed, opening her own briefcase to reveal legal documents that would soon reshape Wheeler's understanding of federal disability law. "Wheeler's been collecting settlements from insurance companies, while simultaneously discriminating against legitimate service dog handlers. He's essentially been paid to violate the ADA, which elevates this from simple discrimination to federal racketeering territory." The implications hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. Wheeler's cruelty hadn't been random ignorance. It had been calculated exploitation of veterans and their service animals for financial gain. Every insult, every threat, every moment of humiliation had been part of a deliberate scheme to profit from discrimination. Chen noticed Rodriguez's expression and placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Bear, what Wheeler did to you today wasn't just personal cruelty. It was the culmination of a pattern that's been hurting veterans throughout Southern California. Your willingness to report this incident gives us the final piece we needed to shut down his operation permanently." "But how does this work legally?" Rodriguez asked, his military training demanding tactical understanding of the operation they were about to execute. "What exactly are we going to do when we go back in there?" Captain Mitchell's expression took on the focused intensity Rodriguez remembered from her military service. "We're going to present Wheeler with irrefutable evidence of his criminal behavior and offer him a choice between immediate compliance with federal law or federal prosecution for insurance fraud, ADA violations, and civil rights conspiracy." Was he just changed to civil rights conspiracy? Rodriguez had never heard the term applied to service dog discrimination. When someone systematically targets disabled veterans for discrimination while simultaneously defrauding insurance companies, they're not just violating disability law, they're engaging in a conspiracy to deprive citizens of their civil rights under federal protection, Captain Mitchell explained. The penalties for civil rights conspiracy can include significant prison time, especially when the victims are disabled veterans. Chen activated his tablet computer, showing Rodriguez a comprehensive digital case file that documented Wheeler's pattern of behavior over the past 6 months. "We have recorded conversations, insurance claim documents, testimony from multiple veterans, and financial records showing Wheeler's fraudulent profits. What we didn't have was real-time documentation of Wheeler's discriminatory behavior in action. Which is where your encounter becomes crucial evidence," Captain Mitchell added. "Wheeler's treatment of you and Zeus today was witnessed, documented, and follows the exact pattern we've been tracking. It's the smoking gun that transforms our investigation from circumstantial evidence to ironclad prosecution material." Rodriguez studied the case file, seeing names and photos of other veterans who had suffered similar treatment at Wheeler's hands. Some were Marines like himself, others were soldiers, sailors, and airmen. All had service dogs, all had been humiliated and turned away, and all had been unknowing victims of Wheeler's fraudulent insurance schemes. "How many veterans has he hurt?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "Directly, at least 15 that we can document," Chen replied. "Indirectly, probably hundreds more who heard about his reputation and simply avoided his business, depriving themselves of services they needed because they feared discrimination." The weight of that revelation settled over Rodriguez like a heavy blanket. Wheeler's cruelty had rippled far beyond the walls of his shop, creating a climate of fear that prevented veterans from accessing basic services in their own community. "There's something else you should know," Captain Mitchell said, her voice taking on a tone that suggested additional complications. "Wheeler's insurance fraud scheme wasn't operating in isolation. We believe he's been part of a larger network of businesses throughout Southern California that have been coordinating discriminatory practices and sharing fraudulent claim strategies." Rodriguez felt Zeus press closer against his leg. The dog's intuitive response to his handler's rising stress levels. "You mean there are other businesses doing the same thing?" "We think so," Chen confirmed. "Wheeler's financial records show payments from something called the Small Business Protection Alliance, which appears to be a consulting group that teaches business owners how to discriminate against disabled customers while maximizing insurance claim profits." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. What Rodriguez had experienced as personal humiliation was actually part of a systematic effort to exploit and exclude disabled veterans from civilian commerce while profiting from their exclusion. "But here's where your courage changes everything," Captain Mitchell said, her voice carrying the pride Rodriguez remembered from their military service. "By reporting Wheeler's behavior and agreeing to serve as a witness, you're not just seeking justice for yourself. You're breaking open a criminal conspiracy that's been hurting veterans across multiple states." Chen nodded in agreement. "The Department of Justice has been looking for a case exactly like this. Clear ADA violations connected to insurance fraud with documented harm to disabled veterans. Your encounter with Wheeler gives them everything they need to launch a comprehensive investigation of the entire network." Rodriguez looked down at Zeus, whose calm amber eyes seemed to reflect an understanding that their suffering had served a larger purpose. The humiliation and fear he'd experienced just an hour earlier had been transformed into the key evidence needed to protect countless other veterans from similar treatment. "What do you need me to do?" Rodriguez asked, his voice steady with renewed purpose. "Right now, we're going to walk back into Wheeler's shop together," Captain Mitchell explained. "I'm going to present him with legal documentation of his federal violations and offer him a settlement agreement that includes full compliance with ADA requirements, compensation for all affected veterans, and cooperation with the broader federal investigation." "And if he refuses?" Rodriguez asked. Chen smiled grimly. "Then I present him with federal arrest warrants that are already prepared and waiting for my signal. Wheeler's going to learn that discriminating against disabled veterans while defrauding insurance companies constitutes federal racketeering, which carries mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines." The transformation in Rodriguez's emotional state was remarkable. An hour earlier, he had been an isolated veteran struggling with panic and humiliation. Now, he was a key witness in a federal investigation that would protect veterans throughout the region from systematic discrimination and fraud. "There's one more thing," Captain Mitchell said, pulling out additional paperwork. "The Naval Special Warfare Foundation has been following this case through their veteran advocacy program. They've authorized an immediate emergency assistance grant to cover your laptop repair and any other technology needs you might have." Rodriguez felt tears building again, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. "I don't understand. How do they even know about my situation?" "Rodriguez," came a familiar voice from behind them. "Did you really think Gunny Vasquez was working alone?" Rodriguez turned to see Master Chief Petty Officer Lisa Shark Thompson approaching, her civilian clothes unable to disguise the command presence that had made her a legend in the special operations community. Behind her walked two more figures Rodriguez recognized from their shared military service, former teammates who had transitioned to civilian careers but maintained their commitment to supporting fellow veterans. "Master Chief Thompson," Rodriguez said, struggling to process the expanding scope of support that was materializing around him. "What are you doing here?" "Rodriguez, when Gunny Vasquez put out the word that one of our Marines was being targeted by a predator who's been systematically abusing veterans, did you think we were just going to sit at home and let it slide?" Thompson's voice carried the fierce protective instinct that had characterized her leadership style throughout their deployment. The realization hit Rodriguez with stunning force. This wasn't just about his individual encounter with Wheeler. This was about a military community that had spent years learning to protect its members, responding to a threat with the same coordinated intensity they had once applied to combat operations. "How many people are involved in this?" Rodriguez asked, looking around the parking lot and noticing additional vehicles that had arrived while he was focused on Chen and Captain Mitchell. Thompson smiled with satisfaction. "Enough to ensure that Wheeler understands the consequences of his actions and that this kind of systematic abuse of veterans stops permanently. When you target one of us, you target all of us. When you mock a veteran's service dog, you mock every sacrifice made by every service member who's ever struggled with invisible wounds." Chen checked his watch and looked toward Wheeler's electronics. "Bear, are you ready to go back in there? This time, you won't be facing Wheeler's ignorance and cruelty alone. This time, you'll be backed by federal law, documented evidence, and a military community that spent years learning how to protect its own." Rodriguez stood up slowly, feeling Zeus immediately adjust to provide support and guidance. The German Shepard's training allowed him to sense the fundamental shift in his handler's emotional state from vulnerability to strength, from isolation to support, from victim to advocate. "Let's go educate Mr. Wheeler about the consequences of discriminating against America's veterans," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a Marine who had rediscovered his purpose and his brotherhood. As they approached Wheeler's electronics, Rodriguez realized that what was about to happen wasn't just about personal justice or even stopping Wheeler's criminal behavior. It was about demonstrating that the military community's commitment to protecting its own extended far beyond active duty service, that the bonds forged in combat created lifelong obligations to stand up for each other against all threats, foreign and domestic. Wheeler was about to learn that when you attack a veteran, you don't just face one person seeking justice. You face an entire community of warriors who have spent their lives learning that the mission isn't complete until everyone comes home safely. The electronic chime of Wheeler's door announced their return with an ominous finality. Wheeler's head snapped up from his workbench, his casual dismissiveness from earlier replaced by visible confusion as he saw Rodriguez flanked by a coordinated team of professionals. The transformation in the shop's atmosphere was immediate and undeniable. What had been Wheeler's domain of petty tyranny was now under new management. "Mr. Wheeler," Captain Mitchell announced, her voice cutting through the dusty air with judicial authority. "I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell, Federal Disability Rights Attorney representing Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. This is Staff Sergeant Chen from the Department of Veterans Affairs Fraud Investigation Unit and Master Chief Thompson from the Naval Special Warfare Foundation." Wheeler's complexion shifted from confusion to ash-gray terror as the words federal and fraud investigation registered. His earlier confidence in dismissing a solitary veteran had been replaced by the stark reality of facing coordinated federal enforcement action. "Gentlemen, ladies," Wheeler stammered, his voice cracking under pressure he had never anticipated. "If this is about the earlier misunderstanding with the service dog, I'm sure we can work something out. I was just being cautious about insurance." "Liability." Chen stepped forward, opening his tablet to display official federal documentation that made Wheeler's insurance liability excuses irrelevant. "Mr. Wheeler, we're not here about a misunderstanding. We're here about a 6-month investigation into systematic insurance fraud, deliberate ADA violations, and what appears to be participation in a multi-state conspiracy to defraud insurance companies while discriminating against disabled veterans." The blood drained from Wheeler's face as Chen continued displaying evidence that transformed his local electronics shop into a federal crime scene. Financial records, recorded conversations, insurance claim documents, and testimony from multiple veterans painted a picture of calculated criminal behavior that went far beyond simple ignorance or prejudice. "This is impossible," Wheeler protested weakly, his voice lacking any conviction. "I run a small electronics repair shop. I don't know anything about conspiracies or federal crimes." Captain Mitchell placed a thick legal document on Wheeler's counter with the kind of deliberate precision that suggested his denials were not only expected, but irrelevant. "Mr. Wheeler, this is a federal complaint documenting 15 separate incidents of service dog discrimination at your establishment, each followed by fraudulent insurance claims totaling over $47,000 in false settlements." Wheeler's legs gave out, forcing him to grab his workbench for support as the scope of his legal exposure became clear. What he had considered clever financial maneuvering was revealed as federal racketeering that carried mandatory minimum prison sentences. "But I was told this was legal," Wheeler pleaded, his voice rising with panic. "The Small Business Protection Alliance said these were legitimate insurance recovery strategies. They said discriminating against service dogs was protected under business autonomy laws." Chen and Captain Mitchell exchanged meaningful glances as Wheeler inadvertently confirmed their suspicions about the broader conspiracy they had been investigating. The Small Business Protection Alliance was the missing link they needed to connect Wheeler's local crimes to a national network of coordinated fraud. "Mr. Wheeler," Chen said, his voice taking on the focused intensity of an interrogator who had just received confirmation of a key theory, "tell us everything you know about the Small Business Protection Alliance. Your cooperation in this matter will determine whether you face federal prosecution as a conspiracy leader or as a victim who was manipulated by criminal organizers." The offer of reduced culpability in exchange for cooperation gave Wheeler his first glimpse of hope since the federal team had entered his shop. He began speaking rapidly, desperate to distance himself from the criminal network he had unknowingly joined. "They contacted me about 8 months ago," Wheeler began, his words tumbling over each other in his eagerness to cooperate. "Said they were a consulting group that helped small businesses protect themselves from disability lawsuit scams. They showed me statistics about fake service dogs and taught me how to identify fraudulent claims." Captain Mitchell took detailed notes as Wheeler described recruitment tactics that suggested a sophisticated criminal organization targeting vulnerable small business owners throughout multiple states. The conspiracy was larger and more organized than they had initially suspected. They provided training materials, Wheeler continued, scripts for handling service dog situations, documentation for insurance claims, even legal language to use. If anyone complained, they said it was all completely legal, that we were protecting legitimate businesses from exploitation by scammers. Chen documented Wheeler's revelations with growing excitement as each detail provided additional evidence for the broader federal investigation. Wheeler's shop wasn't a criminal enterprise. It was a victim location that had been systematically manipulated by professional fraudsters. "Mr. Wheeler," Captain Mitchell said, her voice moderating from prosecutorial aggression to professional guidance. Your cooperation is noted and appreciated. However, your participation in discriminatory practices, regardless of how you were manipulated into them, still constitutes federal violations that require immediate correction and restitution. Wheeler nodded frantically, clearly relieved. That cooperation might reduce his legal exposure while simultaneously terrified of the financial and legal consequences he still faced. What do I need to do? I'll do whatever you require to make this right. Rodriguez stepped forward for the first time since entering the shop, Zeus maintaining perfect position beside him as his handler prepared to address the man who had humiliated him just hours earlier. The transformation in Rodriguez's bearing was remarkable. Where Wheeler had seen a vulnerable veteran to be exploited, he now faced a federal witness, backed by the full weight of military brotherhood and federal law enforcement. "Mr. Wheeler," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying quiet dignity that made Wheeler's earlier mockery seem pathetically small, "what you did to me today wasn't just illegal discrimination. You mocked my service, questioned my integrity, and threatened to have me arrested for seeking basic accommodation for my combat-related disabilities." Wheeler's face crumpled with shame as Rodriguez continued, his words carrying the moral weight that transformed legal proceedings into profound education about honor, service, and consequence. "But your cruelty to me was just one incident in a pattern that's been hurting veterans throughout this region. Veterans who needed services you provided but were turned away because of their service dogs. Veterans who went without necessary repairs because they feared the kind of treatment you gave me." Zeus remained perfectly calm throughout Rodriguez's statement, his professional demeanor serving as a living reminder of the training, dedication, and service that Wheeler had so casually dismissed. The German shepherd's presence transformed the confrontation from abstract legal proceedings into a concrete demonstration of the partnership between veterans and their service animals. "I want you to understand something," Rodriguez continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "When you attack a veteran service dog, you're not just attacking an animal. You're attacking the lifeline that allows that veteran to function in civilian society. You're attacking the training and sacrifice that earned their right to accommodation. You're attacking the brotherhood that binds all service members together." Master Chief Thompson stepped forward, her command presence filling the small shop, with authority that made federal legal proceedings feel like a minor administrative detail compared to the moral reckoning Wheeler was experiencing. "Mr. Wheeler," Thompson said, her voice carrying decades of military leadership experience, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez served 3 combat tours in Afghanistan. He earned his disabilities defending the freedom that allows you to operate this business. His service dog, Zeus, represents hundreds of hours of specialized training designed to help combat veterans reintegrate into the civilian society they fought to protect. Wheeler began crying openly as the weight of his actions and their consequences became clear. The federal legal exposure was terrifying, but the moral education he was receiving from his victims was devastating in a way that transcended legal punishment. Captain Mitchell consulted her legal documents before presenting Wheeler with his options for resolution. "Mr. Wheeler, here's what's going to happen. You have 2 choices. First, you can sign this federal compliance agreement that includes full AIDA training, restitution to all affected veterans, cooperation with our ongoing investigation of the Small Business Protection Alliance, and submission to federal monitoring of your business practices." Wheeler nodded eagerly, clearly preferring compliance to prosecution. "Or," Captain Mitchell continued, "you can exercise your right to legal counsel and face federal prosecution for insurance fraud, civil rights violations, and conspiracy, charges that carry mandatory minimum sentences of 5 to 7 years in federal prison." The choice was obvious, but Captain Mitchell wanted Wheeler to understand that his cooperation was a privilege being offered by his victims, not a right he could demand. Chen activated recording equipment to document Wheeler's formal acceptance of the compliance agreement, ensuring that his cooperation would be legally binding and federally enforceable. Mr. Wheeler, do you voluntarily agree to the terms of this federal compliance agreement, including full restitution to affected veterans and cooperation with ongoing federal investigations? Yes, Wheeler said immediately, his voice hoarse. With emotion and relief. I agree to everything. I want to make this right. Rodriguez felt a profound sense of closure as Wheeler formally acknowledged his wrongdoing and committed to changing his behavior. The humiliation and fear he had experienced earlier had been transformed into federal action that would protect countless other veterans from similar treatment. There's one more thing, Master Chief Thompson said, producing additional documentation that surprised even the federal investigators. The Naval Special Warfare Foundation has been authorized to establish a veteran service center in this location once Mr. Wheeler's electronics business is relocated to comply with federal accessibility requirements. The announcement transformed the resolution from simple legal compliance into community transformation that would benefit veterans throughout the region. Wheeler's former domain of discrimination would become a resource center supporting exactly the population he had been targeting for exploitation. Mr. Wheeler, Thompson continued, your cooperation in this transition will be noted in federal records. The Foundation will provide job placement assistance and retraining opportunities that will allow you to rebuild your career in a way that serves rather than exploits the veteran community. Wheeler's transformation from predator to potential ally represented the kind of comprehensive justice that military communities understood, not just punishment for wrongdoing, but rehabilitation that transformed enemies into assets for future mission success. Chen concluded the formal proceedings by presenting Wheeler with federal monitoring equipment that would ensure his compliance with ADA requirements while documenting evidence for the broader conspiracy investigation. Mr. Wheeler, this equipment will record all customer interactions involving service animals. Any future violations will result in immediate federal prosecution without the option for compliance agreements. As the federal team prepared to leave Wheeler's electronics, Rodriguez realized that what had begun as personal humiliation had evolved into community protection that would benefit veterans for years to come. His courage in reporting Wheeler's behavior had not only secured his own justice, but had broken open a criminal conspiracy that threatened veterans throughout multiple states. Rodriguez, Captain Mitchell said as they prepared to leave, your willingness to stand up to Wheeler's discrimination and cooperate with federal investigation has changed the lives of veterans you'll never meet. Your service to your country didn't end when you left the military. It evolved into service to your fellow veterans in civilian society. Zeus looked up at Rodriguez with the calm intelligence that characterized his breed and training, his amber eyes reflecting understanding that their mission had been accomplished successfully. The German shepherd's professional demeanor throughout the confrontation had served as a living reminder of the dignity and purpose that Wheeler had tried to diminish. Outside Wheeler's electronics, Rodriguez found himself surrounded by the military community that had responded to his call for help with the same intensity they had once applied to combat operations. The parking lot had become an impromptu reunion of veterans who had shared combat experience and maintained their commitment to protecting each other in civilian life. Bear, Master Chief Thompson said, her voice carrying pride and satisfaction. What happened here today sends a message throughout this region that discriminating against veterans has consequences. Every business owner who heard about Wheeler's Situation will understand that the veteran community protects its own with professional competence and overwhelming resources. The transformation of Rodriguez's personal crisis into federal law enforcement action and community protection represented the best aspects of military culture adapted to civilian challenges. The brotherhood forged in combat had proven equally effective in defending veterans against domestic threats to their dignity and civil rights. 3 months later, the Wheelers' electronics location had been transformed into the Riverside Veterans Resource Center, providing technology training, legal assistance, and service dog support services to veterans throughout Southern California. Wheeler himself had completed federal retraining programs and was working as a volunteer coordinator, his personal transformation serving as proof that redemption was possible even after serious wrongdoing. The Small Business Protection Alliance conspiracy was dismantled through coordinated federal prosecution that resulted in multiple convictions and the recovery of over $2 million in fraudulent insurance settlements. The network's collapse protected disabled veterans in 17 states from systematic discrimination and fraud. Rodriguez received the 2025 Veterans Advocacy Award from the Department of Veterans Affairs for his courage in reporting discrimination that led to the exposure of the largest service dog fraud conspiracy in federal history. His willingness to transform personal suffering into community protection had prevented countless other veterans from experiencing similar humiliation and exploitation. Zeus continued his service as Rodriguez's companion and lifeline, but his role expanded to include demonstration work at the Veterans Resource Center, where his calm professionalism helped educate business owners about the legitimate needs and capabilities of service animals. The German Shepherd's presence at community events served as a living reminder of the partnership between veterans and their service animals. The bench where Rodriguez had made his desperate phone call to Master Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez now bears a small plaque. When one veteran stands up to injustice, an entire community responds. Service to country evolves into service to each other. The inscription serves as a reminder that military brotherhood extends far beyond active duty, creating lifelong obligations to protect and support fellow veterans against all threats. 6 months after the Wheeler incident, Rodriguez found himself standing before the California State Assembly as the keynote speaker for Veterans Advocacy Day, Zeus positioned beside him with the same calm professionalism that had carried them through their darkest moments. The journey from humiliated victim to state-recognized advocate had transformed not just Rodriguez's understanding of his own purpose, but the entire landscape of veteran rights protection throughout California. Distinguished legislators, fellow veterans and advocates, Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the confidence that comes from discovering that personal suffering can be transformed into community healing. 6 months ago, I walked into a small electronics shop in Riverside with nothing more than a broken laptop and hope for basic respect. What I encountered instead was systematic discrimination that revealed a criminal conspiracy targeting disabled veterans across 17 states. The assembly chamber, filled with lawmakers, veteran advocates, and media representatives, listened with rapt attention as Rodriguez recounted his transformation from isolated victim to federal witness to community leader. Zeus remained perfectly still beside the podium, his presence serving as a living reminder of the service dog partnership that Wheeler had so viciously attacked. But this story isn't really about what one ignorant business owner did to me. And, Zeus, Rodriguez continued, his hand briefly touching the German Shepherd's head. This story is about what happens when military communities refuse to abandon their members in civilian life. This story is about the profound difference between being alone and being part of something larger than yourself. In the weeks following, Wheeler's federal compliance agreement, Rodriguez had discovered that his courage in reporting discrimination had resonated far beyond the immediate legal consequences. Veterans throughout California began reaching out with their own stories of service dog discrimination, creating a network of shared experience that demanded systematic rather than individual responses. The Small Business Protection Alliance, conspiracy that we uncovered, represented more than insurance fraud, Rodriguez explained to the assembly. It represented a calculated attack on the fundamental dignity of disabled veterans who had sacrificed their physical and mental wholeness in service to our nation. These criminals didn't just steal money, they stole hope from veterans who were already struggling to rebuild their lives. Master Chief Thompson, now serving as Director of Veteran Advocacy for the Naval Special Warfare Foundation, had coordinated with Rodriguez to establish the California Veterans Justice Initiative, a statewide program that provided rapid response, support to veterans facing discrimination while building legal precedent that protected all disabled veterans from similar treatment. When Staff Sergeant Rodriguez called me that day, Thompson testified from the witness section. He wasn't just reporting personal mistreatment. He was documenting a pattern of predatory behavior that threatened the civilian reintegration of every veteran who depended on service animals for basic functioning. His willingness to stand up to that threat created the foundation for systemic change that has protected thousands of veterans throughout our state. The initiative had already processed over 200 discrimination complaints, resulting in federal compliance agreements with 67 businesses, criminal charges against 12 individuals involved in insurance fraud, and the establishment of veteran resource centers in 15 California communities. Rodriguez's individual act of courage had multiplied into a movement that was reshaping how civilian businesses understood their obligations to disabled veterans. Legislators, Rodriguez continued, I want you to understand something crucial about the veteran community's response to discrimination. When Wheeler attacked me and Zeus, he didn't just hurt one veteran. He attacked every service member who had ever struggled with invisible wounds. The military doesn't abandon its wounded, and that commitment doesn't end when we transition to civilian life. The California Veterans Justice Initiative had evolved beyond simple discrimination response into a comprehensive support network that connected struggling veterans with resources, advocacy, and most importantly, community. Rodriguez found himself coordinating with former military personnel throughout California who had built successful civilian careers and were eager to support fellow veterans facing challenges. Captain Mitchell's legal work has established precedent that elevated service dog discrimination from simple ADA violations to federal civil rights crimes, Rodriguez testified. When someone targets a disabled veteran's service animal, they're not just violating accommodation law, they're attacking the medical equipment that allows that veteran to participate in civilian society. The legal precedent established through Rodriguez's case had already influenced federal policy recommendations that would strengthen penalties for service dog discrimination while providing enhanced resources for veteran legal advocacy. The Department of Justice had cited the Wheeler prosecution as a model for addressing systematic discrimination against disabled veterans. But beyond the legal victories, Rodriguez said, his voice taking on the emotional weight that connected personal transformation to broader social change. This experience taught me that military service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Military service evolves into civilian service, where the mission becomes protecting and supporting fellow veterans who are still fighting battles that most civilians never see. Zeus shifted slightly, responding to the emotional intensity in Rodriguez's voice with the subtle support that characterized his training. The German shepherd's presence at the State Assembly served as a powerful reminder that service animals weren't pets or emotional support. They were highly trained medical equipment that enabled disabled veterans to function independently in civilian society. When Wheeler called Zeus a fake service dog, Rodriguez continued, he was attacking not just my individual need for accommodation, but the entire concept of invisible disabilities and the sophisticated medical interventions that help veterans manage combat-related conditions. His ignorance represented a broader civilian misunderstanding of what veterans carry home from war. The California Veterans Justice Initiative had partnered with the University of California system to develop educational programs that helped civilian businesses understand their legal obligations to disabled veterans while building bridges between military and civilian communities. Rodriguez had become a regular speaker at business conferences, sharing his story as a teaching tool that prevented discrimination through education rather than punishment. The transformation of Wheeler's electronics into the Riverside Veterans Resource Center represents the kind of restorative justice that military communities understand, Rodriguez explained. We don't just want to punish wrongdoing, we want to transform enemies into allies, to convert places of discrimination into sources of support for the people who were originally targeted. The Veterans Resource Center had become a model for community-based veteran support that was being replicated throughout California and beyond. The center provided technology training, legal assistance, service dog support, and most importantly, a gathering place where veterans could connect with others who understood their experiences and challenges. Wheeler himself has become one of our most effective advocates, Rodriguez revealed, causing murmurs of surprise throughout the assembly chamber. His personal transformation from someone who exploited veterans to someone who serves them demonstrates that redemption is possible when people are given the opportunity to understand the true cost of their actions. Wheeler's volunteer work at the Veterans Resource Center had earned him recognition from the very veteran community he had once victimized. His first-hand understanding of discriminatory business practices made him uniquely qualified to educate other business owners about avoiding similar mistakes while building inclusive environments for disabled veterans. The Small Business Protection Alliance prosecution resulted in the recovery of over $2 million in fraudulent insurance settlements, Rodriguez testified. But more importantly, dismantling that conspiracy protected disabled veterans in 17 states from systematic discrimination that was preventing them from accessing basic civilian services. The federal investigation had revealed that the conspiracy had been targeting not just veterans with service dogs, but all disabled veterans who required workplace accommodations, accessible facilities, or modified services. The criminal network had been teaching business owners throughout multiple states how to discriminate against disabled customers while maximizing insurance claim profits. Staff Sergeant Chen's investigation work demonstrated that federal agencies can respond to veteran discrimination with the same intensity and resources they apply to national security threats, Rodriguez continued. When veterans are targeted for systematic exploitation, the response should be swift, comprehensive, and designed to prevent future incidents rather than simply punishing past behavior. Chen, who had been promoted to Regional Director of Veterans Affairs Fraud Investigation, had used the Wheeler case as a training model for federal investigators throughout the western United States. The investigation techniques developed during the conspiracy prosecution had become standard protocol for addressing systematic discrimination against disabled veterans. Captain Mitchell's legal advocacy has created a new model for veteran rights protection that combines federal enforcement action with community-based support services, Rodriguez testified. Veterans facing discrimination don't just need legal representation, they need community connection that reminds them they're not alone in fighting these battles. Mitchell's law practice had expanded into a non-profit organization that provided free legal services to disabled veterans while training civilian attorneys throughout California to recognize and respond to veteran-specific discrimination. The organization had created a network of legal advocates who understood both military culture and federal disability law. The bench where I made that desperate phone call to Master Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez has become a pilgrimage site for veterans who need to be reminded that military brotherhood extends far beyond active duty service, Rodriguez shared. Veterans from throughout California have visited that location to understand that calling for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a recognition that some battles require backup. The bench had indeed become an unofficial memorial to the power of military community response to civilian threats. Veterans organizations throughout California had adopted similar response protocols, creating rapid deployment teams that could provide immediate support to veterans facing discrimination, legal challenges, or personal crises. Gunny Vasquez's coordination of our response to Wheeler's discrimination demonstrated that military leadership skills translate directly into civilian advocacy effectiveness, Rodriguez testified. When someone attacks a member of the military community, the response should be proportional, professional, and designed to prevent future attacks on other vulnerable veterans. Vasquez had been invited to testify before Congress about adapting military organizational principles to veteran advocacy, sharing the coordination techniques that had transformed Rodriguez's individual crisis into systematic change that protected veterans throughout multiple states. Zeus and I have visited over 50 California schools to educate young people about military service, invisible disabilities, and the partnership between veterans and service animals, Rodriguez revealed. Education prevents discrimination more effectively than punishment, and young people who understand veteran challenges become adult advocates who build inclusive communities. The educational program had reached over 10,000 California students, creating a generation of civilians who understood military service and veteran challenges before entering the workforce or starting businesses. The program combined Rodriguez's personal story with broader education about military culture, veteran transition challenges, and the importance of community support for service members. The Naval Special Warfare Foundation's establishment of veteran resource centers throughout California has created a network of support that ensures no veteran faces discrimination alone, Rodriguez testified. When veterans know they have community backing, they're more likely to report discrimination and less likely to accept mistreatment as inevitable. The foundation had committed to establishing 50 veteran resource centers throughout California by 2027, creating a statewide network of support that would provide immediate assistance to veterans facing any challenge. Each center would be staffed by veterans who understood both military culture and civilian systems. Today, I stand before you not as a victim of discrimination, but as proof that individual courage can create systematic change when it's supported by military community commitment, Rodriguez concluded. The bonds forged in military service create lifelong obligations to protect and support fellow veterans against all threats, foreign and domestic. The assembly chamber erupted in sustained applause as Rodriguez concluded his testimony, Zeus, remaining perfectly calm beside the podium as dozens of legislators, advocates, and media representatives rose to honor their presentation. The standing ovation represented not just recognition of Rodriguez's individual courage, but acknowledgement of the military community's collective commitment to protecting its members. The legislation we're proposing today would create the strongest service dog protection laws in the nation, Rodriguez announced, while establishing rapid response protocols that ensure no veteran faces discrimination alone. Military communities understand that the mission isn't complete until everyone comes home safely, and that commitment extends to protecting veterans in civilian society. The proposed California Veterans Dignity Protection Act would establish criminal penalties for service dog discrimination, mandate veteran sensitivity training for businesses receiving state contracts, and create a statewide rapid response network, modeled on the coordination that had supported Rodriguez's case. When Wheeler attacked Zeus, he thought he was bullying an isolated veteran who had no recourse and no support, Rodriguez testified in closing. What he discovered instead was that military brotherhood extends far beyond active duty, creating communities of support that respond to threats with overwhelming force and unwavering commitment. The legislation passed unanimously 3 weeks later, establishing California as the national model for protecting disabled veterans from discrimination, while building community-based support networks that ensure no veteran faces challenges alone. Rodriguez's transformation from victim to advocate had created systematic change that would protect California veterans for generations. Zeus received his own recognition ceremony, becoming the first service dog in California history to receive a state commendation for public service. The German Shepherd's calm professionalism throughout the entire ordeal had demonstrated the sophisticated training and dedication that characterizes legitimate service animals. The Wheeler incident, which had begun as personal humiliation, had evolved into a movement that redefined how civilian communities support disabled veterans, while establishing legal precedent that protected service dog handlers throughout the nation. Rodriguez's courage in refusing to accept discrimination had created ripples of change that continued expanding throughout the veteran community. Military brotherhood had proven that it could adapt to civilian challenges with the same effectiveness it had demonstrated in combat, protecting vulnerable veterans while building bridges between military and civilian communities that honored service and sacrifice rather than exploiting them for profit. 2 years after the Wheeler incident transformed his life, Rodriguez stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, Zeus at his side, as President Johnson prepared to sign the National Veterans Service Dog Protection Act into federal law. The journey, from a humiliating encounter in a small electronics shop to witnessing the creation of landmark federal legislation, had redefined Rodriguez's understanding of how individual courage could reshape national policy when amplified by unwavering community support. Today, we honor not just the service of our nation's veterans, but their continued commitment to protecting each other in civilian life, President Johnson announced to the assembled crowd of lawmakers, veteran advocates, and military leaders. The legislation we're signing today exists because one Marine refused to accept discrimination as inevitable, and because a military community demonstrated that the bonds forged in service create lifelong obligations to defend each other against all threats. The National Veterans Service Dog Protection Act represented the culmination of a nationwide movement that had grown from Rodriguez's initial phone call to Master Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez. The federal legislation established criminal penalties for service dog discrimination, created rapid response protocols for supporting veterans facing discrimination, and mandated federal funding for veteran advocacy programs in all 50 states. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the President continued, turning to acknowledge the Marine whose courage had catalyzed federal action, your refusal to remain silent in the face of discrimination has protected thousands of disabled veterans who will never know your name, but who will benefit from your courage for generations to come. The path from California state legislation to federal law had been accelerated by a coordinated campaign that demonstrated the political effectiveness of organized veteran advocacy. Rodriguez had testified before Congress, spoken at veteran events in 37 states, and worked with federal legislators to craft comprehensive protection that addressed not just service dog discrimination, but the broader challenges facing disabled veterans in civilian society. The military teaches us that the mission isn't complete until everyone comes home safely, Rodriguez had testified during congressional hearings. In civilian life, that mission evolves into ensuring that no veteran faces discrimination, exploitation, or abandonment while trying to rebuild their life after service. When Wheeler attacked Zeus, he was attacking every veteran who depends on service animals to function independently in civilian society. Zeus had become a celebrity in his own right, appearing at veteran events throughout the nation as a living symbol of the partnership between disabled veterans and their service animals. The German Shepherd's calm professionalism in high-stress environments had helped educate millions of Americans about the sophisticated training and medical necessity that characterized legitimate service dogs. The transformation we've witnessed over the past 2 years demonstrates the power of military communities to adapt their protective instincts to civilian challenges, testified Master Chief Thompson during the White House ceremony. When Staff Sergeant Rodriguez called for help, he activated a network of support that had been forged in combat and refined through decades of shared service. That network didn't just respond to his individual crisis, it mobilized to prevent similar crises from affecting other veterans. The federal legislation had been modeled on the California Veterans Dignity Protection Act, but expanded to address discrimination patterns that had been identified in all 50 states. The Department of Justice had documented over 1,200 cases of systematic service dog discrimination, with fraudulent insurance claims totaling more than $18 million in false settlements. The Small Business Protection Alliance conspiracy that targeted Staff Sergeant Rodriguez represented just one network in a national pattern of exploitation targeting disabled veterans, testified FBI Director Harrison during congressional hearings. Dismantling that conspiracy revealed similar criminal organizations operating in 43 states, all using coordinated tactics to profit from discriminating against America's most vulnerable veterans. The federal investigation had resulted in over 300 criminal prosecutions, the recovery of $87 million in fraudulent settlements, and the establishment of federal monitoring systems that protected disabled veterans from systematic discrimination. Rodriguez's individual case had become the foundation for the largest veteran rights enforcement action in American history. But the real victory isn't measured in prosecutions or recovered funds, Rodriguez explained. During his White House remarks, the real victory is measured in the thousands of veterans who now seek services they need without fear of discrimination, who know they have community support when they face challenges, and who understand that their service to country creates lifelong bonds with fellow veterans who will never abandon them. The National Veterans Service Dog Protection Act had created federal funding for veteran resource centers in every state, establishing a nationwide network of support that ensured no veteran faced discrimination alone. Each center was staffed by veterans who understood both military culture and federal disability law, creating bridges between military and civilian communities that honored service while protecting vulnerable veterans. Wheeler's transformation from predator to advocate demonstrates that education and accountability can create allies from former enemies, Rodriguez testified. His volunteer work at the Riverside Veterans Resource Center has helped hundreds of veterans access services while educating business owners about their obligations to disabled veterans. Redemption is possible when people are given the opportunity to understand the true cost of their actions and the chance to make meaningful amends. Wheeler had indeed become one of the most effective advocates for veteran rights in Southern California, his first-hand experience with discriminatory business practices making him uniquely qualified to help other business owners build inclusive environments for disabled veterans. His speaking engagements at business conferences had prevented countless discrimination incidents while building understanding between civilian businesses and the veteran community. The bench where I made that desperate phone call to Gunny Vasquez has become a national pilgrimage site for veterans seeking to understand the power of military brotherhood, Rodriguez shared during the ceremony. Veterans from every state have visited that location to see where one Marine's call for help triggered a movement that changed federal law and protected veterans throughout our nation. The bench had been designated as a National Veterans Heritage Site with a bronze plaque that read, "When one veteran stands up to injustice, an entire community responds." Military service creates bonds that extend far beyond active duty, forging lifelong commitments to protect and support fellow veterans against all threats, foreign and domestic. The site hosted monthly gatherings where veterans could connect with local support networks and share their own stories of challenge and triumph. Staff Sergeant Chen's investigation work revealed that targeting disabled veterans for discrimination and fraud constitutes a form of domestic terrorism that undermines national security, testified Homeland Security Secretary Martinez. Veterans who are afraid to access civilian services because of discrimination cannot successfully reintegrate into the communities they fought to protect. Protecting veteran rights is protecting national security. Chen had been promoted to director of the newly created Federal Veterans Protection Bureau, a specialized law enforcement agency dedicated to investigating crimes targeting veterans, while coordinating with military communities to provide rapid response support. The Bureau had established field offices in all 50 states, staffed by veterans who understood both federal law enforcement and military culture. Captain Mitchell's legal advocacy has created a new model for federal disability rights enforcement that recognizes the unique challenges facing disabled veterans, testified Attorney General Williams. The precedent established through Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's case has influenced federal policy recommendations that strengthen penalties for discrimination while providing enhanced resources for veteran legal advocacy. Mitchell had been appointed as the first director of Federal Veterans Legal Advocacy, overseeing a nationwide network of attorneys who provided free legal services to disabled veterans while training civilian lawyers to recognize and respond to veteran-specific discrimination. Her organization had handled over 5,000 cases in its first year, establishing legal precedent that protected veterans in employment, housing, public accommodations, and healthcare settings. The Naval Special Warfare Foundation's expansion from supporting active duty personnel to advocating for all veterans demonstrates how military organizations can adapt their mission to serve the entire veteran community, testified Foundation Director Admiral Roberts. The Foundation now operates veteran resource centers in all 50 states, providing technology training, legal assistance, service dog support, and community connection that ensures no veteran faces challenges alone. The Foundation had received federal funding to establish 200 additional veteran resource centers by 2028, creating a comprehensive national network that would provide immediate assistance to veterans facing any challenge. Each center would serve as a hub for connecting veterans with local resources, while maintaining the military-community bonds that had proven so effective in supporting struggling veterans. Master Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez's coordination of our response to Wheeler's discrimination has become the training model for veteran advocacy organizations throughout the nation, Rodriguez testified. Her leadership demonstrated that military organizational principles can be adapted to civilian challenges with devastating effectiveness. When veterans are threatened, the response should be swift, coordinated, and designed to prevent future attacks on other vulnerable veterans. Vasquez had been invited to establish the National Veterans Rapid Response Coordination Center, a federal agency that provided immediate support to veterans facing discrimination, legal challenges, or personal crises. The center maintained contact with veteran organizations in every state, enabling coordinated responses that could mobilize comprehensive support within hours of receiving a call for help. The educational programs that Zeus and I have conducted in schools throughout the nation have reached over 100,000 students, Rodriguez revealed during his remarks. These young people represent the future civilian workforce, the future business owners, the future community leaders who will interact with veterans for decades to come. Education prevents discrimination more effectively than punishment, and young people who understand veteran challenges become adult advocates who build inclusive communities. The Department of Education had incorporated veteran awareness education into national curriculum standards, ensuring that every American student would learn about military service, veteran transition challenges, and the importance of community support for service members. The program combined Rodriguez's personal story with broader education about military culture and the civilian obligations to support those who had served. The legislation we're signing today creates the strongest veteran protection laws in American history, President Johnson announced as he prepared to sign the bill. But more importantly, it demonstrates that the American people understand our obligation to support those who have served our nation with honor. Veterans protected our freedom in uniform. Now we protect their dignity and rights in civilian life. The signing ceremony was attended by over 500 veterans, representing every branch of military service and every generation of American veterans. Their presence demonstrated the broad coalition that had supported the legislation and the ongoing commitment to protecting all veterans from discrimination and exploitation. When I walked into Wheeler's Electronics 2 years ago, I was an isolated veteran struggling with PTSD and financial hardship, Rodriguez reflected during his closing remarks. I had no idea that my encounter with discrimination would trigger a movement that would change federal law and protect veterans throughout our nation. But that's the power of military brotherhood. Individual courage becomes collective action when veterans refuse to abandon each other. Zeus received his own recognition during the ceremony, becoming the first service dog in American history to receive a Presidential Unit Citation for distinguished service to the veteran community. The German Shepherd's calm professionalism throughout 2 years of high-profile advocacy had demonstrated the sophisticated training and dedication that characterize legitimate service animals while educating millions of Americans about the partnership between disabled veterans and their service. Dogs. The Wheeler incident began as personal humiliation, but evolved into national transformation because military communities understand that protecting one veteran means protecting all veterans, Rodriguez concluded. The bonds forged in military service create lifelong obligations to defend each other against all threats. That commitment doesn't end when we take off the uniform. It evolves into civilian service that builds communities worthy of the sacrifices made by those who served. The National Veteran Service Dog Protection Act took effect immediately upon signing, establishing federal penalties for service dog discrimination, while creating funding mechanisms that would support veteran advocacy programs for decades. The legislation represented the fastest passage of veteran rights legislation in American history, demonstrating the political effectiveness of organized veteran advocacy. This law exists because one Marine refused to accept discrimination as inevitable, and because a military community proved that the bonds of service create unbreakable commitments to protect each other, President Johnson concluded. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Zeus have reminded our nation that military service doesn't end with discharge. It evolves into lifelong commitments to defend fellow veterans against all threats to their dignity and rights. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Rodriguez, the highest civilian honor bestowed by the United States government. The medal recognized not just his individual courage in facing discrimination, but his leadership in transforming personal suffering into systematic change that protected vulnerable veterans throughout the nation. Military service teaches us that individual courage can change the course of history when it's supported by unwavering community commitment, Rodriguez said as he accepted the medal. My encounter with Wheeler's cruelty became a movement for veteran rights because military communities refuse to abandon their wounded. That commitment transcends active duty service, creating lifelong bonds that respond to civilian threats with the same intensity once applied to combat operations. Zeus remained perfectly calm throughout the ceremony, his professional demeanor serving as a living reminder of the partnership between disabled veterans and their service animals that the new federal law was designed to protect. The German Shepherd had become a symbol of the resilience, training, and dedication that characterized both military service and the civilian support systems that helped veterans thrive after their return from combat. The impact of the National Veterans Service Dog Protection Act extended far beyond legal protection, creating cultural changes that transformed how civilian communities understood their obligations to support disabled veterans. Rodriguez's story had become a teaching tool used in business schools, law enforcement training, and community education programs throughout the nation. When we protect the most vulnerable members of our veteran community, we honor the service and sacrifice of all who have worn our nation's uniform, President Johnson declared as the ceremony concluded. The legislation we've signed today ensures that no veteran will face discrimination alone, that service dog handlers will receive the respect and accommodation they've earned, and that military brotherhood will continue protecting our veterans in civilian life with the same dedication they once showed in defending our nation. The White House ceremony marked not an ending, but a beginning. The establishment of federal protections that would evolve and expand as veteran advocates identified new challenges and developed innovative solutions. Rodriguez's transformation from victim to national advocate had created a template for turning personal adversity into community protection that would inspire future generations of veterans facing civilian challenges. Military brotherhood had proven that it could adapt to any threat, foreign or domestic, protecting vulnerable veterans while building bridges between military and civilian communities that honored service and sacrifice rather than exploiting them for personal gain. 5 years after his life-changing encounter with Wheeler, Rodriguez found himself standing before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, Zeus positioned beside him as he prepared to address delegates from 193 nations about the global responsibility to protect disabled veterans. The journey from a local discrimination incident to international advocacy had demonstrated how individual courage could transcend national boundaries when amplified by communities committed to justice and human dignity. Distinguished delegates, fellow veterans, and advocates for human rights," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned that personal transformation could inspire global change. "5 years ago, I experienced discrimination that revealed systematic abuse targeting disabled veterans throughout my nation. Today, I stand before you representing not just American veterans, but disabled service members from every nation who have sacrificed their physical and mental wholeness in defense of freedom and human dignity." The UN General Assembly had convened a special session on international veterans' rights, following reports that service dog discrimination and veteran exploitation were occurring in dozens of countries worldwide. Rodriguez's advocacy work had expanded beyond American borders, as international veteran organizations sought his expertise in building rapid response networks that protected vulnerable veterans from civilian predators. "The discrimination I faced from Wheeler wasn't unique to America," Rodriguez continued, his testimony supported by research conducted by the International Veterans Advocacy Coalition. "We've documented similar patterns of exploitation in 47 nations, where disabled veterans are targeted for fraud, discrimination, and systematic abuse by civilian predators who assume veterans have no recourse and no community support." Zeus had become an international symbol of the partnership between disabled veterans and their service animals, appearing at veteran events on 5 continents while helping educate global audiences about the sophisticated training and medical necessity that characterized legitimate service dogs. The German Shepherd's calm professionalism had transcended language barriers, communicating the dignity and purpose that characterized military service worldwide. The rapid response network that emerged to defend me against Wheeler's cruelty has become a model for international veteran advocacy, Rodriguez testified before the Assembly. Military communities in 23 nations have adopted similar coordination protocols, creating global networks of support that ensure no veteran faces discrimination alone, regardless of their nationality or the country where they seek services. The International Veterans Rapid Response Network had been established through coordination between veteran organizations worldwide, enabling real-time communication and support deployment across national boundaries. When veterans faced discrimination in any participating nation, they could access immediate assistance from military communities that understood both local laws and the universal bonds that connected all who had served in uniform. Master Chief Thompson's leadership in establishing international veteran resource centers has created unprecedented cooperation between military communities that were once separated by national boundaries, Rodriguez explained to the Assembly. Veterans from former enemy nations now work together to protect disabled service members from civilian exploitation, demonstrating that military honor transcends political differences when vulnerable veterans need protection. Thompson had been appointed Director of International Veterans Advocacy by the World Veterans Federation, overseeing a global network of resource centers that provided technology training, legal assistance, and community connection to veterans in 68 countries. The centers served as embassies for military culture within civilian communities, building bridges that honored service while protecting vulnerable veterans from exploitation. The transformation of Wheeler from predator to international advocate demonstrates the global potential for redemption and education, Rodriguez testified. His work training business owners in 17 countries about veteran rights and service dog accommodation has prevented thousands of discrimination incidents, while building understanding between civilian businesses and military communities worldwide. When I walked into Wheeler's Electronics 5 years ago, I was an isolated veteran struggling with PTSD and financial hardship, Rodriguez reflected as he concluded his testimony. I had no idea that my encounter with discrimination would trigger a global movement that would change international law and protect veterans throughout the world. But that's the power of military brotherhood. Individual courage becomes universal action when veterans refuse to abandon each other across any boundary. The General Assembly erupted in sustained applause as Rodriguez concluded his testimony, with delegates from every continent rising to honor his presentation. Zeus remained perfectly calm beside the podium as representatives from 193 nations demonstrated their commitment to protecting disabled veterans from discrimination and exploitation. The bonds forged in military service create obligations that transcend national boundaries, political differences, and cultural divisions, Rodriguez declared in closing. Veterans who serve different nations in different conflicts share common bonds of sacrifice that create universal responsibilities to protect each other from civilian predators who exploit our vulnerabilities. The Universal Veterans Protection Protocol was adopted unanimously by the General Assembly, establishing the strongest international veteran protection standards in world history while creating global enforcement mechanisms that ensured compliance. With veteran rights obligations, the protocol took effect immediately, providing comprehensive protection for disabled veterans in every UN member nation. This protocol exists because one Marine refused to accept discrimination as inevitable, and because military communities worldwide prove that the bonds of service create unbreakable commitments to protect each other, UN Secretary-General Martinez declared as she signed the protocol. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Zeus have reminded the world that military service creates global citizenship that transcends national boundaries while creating universal obligations to defend veteran dignity and rights. The ceremony concluded with the establishment of the Rodriguez International Veterans Advocacy Center at UN headquarters, creating a permanent institution dedicated to protecting disabled veterans from discrimination while coordinating rapid response support across national boundaries. The center would serve as the global coordination hub for the international veteran advocacy movement that had grown from Rodriguez's individual act of courage. Military service teaches us that individual courage can change the course of history when it's supported by communities that refuse to abandon their members, Rodriguez said as he accepted recognition as the first International Veterans Advocate General. My encounter with Wheeler's cruelty became a global movement for veteran rights because military communities worldwide understand that protecting one veteran means protecting all veterans, regardless of nationality or the conflicts in which they served. Zeus received his own international recognition, becoming the first service dog in world history to receive a UN Distinguished Service Medal for contributions to global veteran advocacy. The German Shepherd's calm professionalism throughout 5 years of international advocacy had demonstrated the universal partnership between disabled veterans and their service animals, while educating global audiences about the dignity and purpose that characterized military service worldwide. The bench where this movement began will now serve as the focal point for International Veterans Solidarity Day, Rodriguez announced. Veterans from every nation will gather there annually to remember that military brotherhood creates global communities of support that respond to threats against any veteran with overwhelming force and unwavering commitment. The impact of the Universal Veterans Protection Protocol extended far beyond legal protection, creating cultural changes that transformed how civilian communities worldwide understood their obligations to support disabled veterans. Rodriguez's story had become a teaching tool used in international business schools, diplomatic training programs, and community education initiatives throughout the world. When we protect the most vulnerable members of our global veteran community, We honor the service and sacrifice of all who have worn uniform in defense of freedom and human dignity, Secretary General Martinez declared as the ceremony concluded. The protocol we've adopted today ensures that no veteran anywhere in the world will face discrimination alone, that service dog handlers will receive universal respect and accommodation, and that military brotherhood will continue protecting veterans across all boundaries with the same dedication they once showed in defending their nations. The UN ceremony marked the evolution of Rodriguez's advocacy from personal vindication to global transformation, demonstrating how individual courage could create systematic change that protected vulnerable veterans across continents and cultures. Military brotherhood had proven that it could transcend any boundary when the mission involved protecting those who had sacrificed in service to freedom and human dignity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.